Hi and welcome to the shed. Today I'm carrying on with the strip down of the Sportster forks, and the first thing I needed to do was to make up some special tools. Now they might not look much, but these are things that you need. You can buy special Harley tools, and I was tempted to make something very similar to what Harley use, but in the end I went with this design, and there's a reason for that which I'll come to in a minute. But first let me show you what I did to actually make these. Right, so the end result was a 10mm slot. Now I used a washer because it seemed the obvious thing. You need to drill a 10mm hole. I don't actually seem to have a 10mm drill bit, so and this just occurred to me is really the thing that I need. So a 10mm washer and 2 bolts that screw in. Now I stripped the powder coating off these because what I expected to do was to need to weld a nut either side here, because this being so thin here, there really isn't a lot of meat to create a thread. And if this was going to be a proper long-term tool, I would have welded a nut on here, and the proper Harley tool has much thicker walls, but as it happens this will work. And there's just enough of a thread to catch in there. Now, the Harley tool has big handles welded to this, and alternatively, what you can do is simply use longer bolts. Now, these are M8 bolts, so you can use those as a handle. And if you're going to do that, you probably again want to make this something out of thicker. I had originally intended to make this out of a piece of scaffold tube, which would have done the job really well and been really strong, but for a one-off rebuild of the forks, or maybe once or twice, this is quite adequate. Now again, as I said, I didn't put handles on this and I haven't used longer bolts, and the reason for that is the Harley tool is designed to be used by 2 people. So you put this onto the actual fork cap. I'll show you that, and then you push it down, or if it's got the handles, you grab the handles and you pull them down, and it's a 2-man job, because one person pushes this down, which pushes the spring down, and then you slide this collar in and it catches against the rod and then holds this down, and you can then take the fork apart. I worked on the basis that I can't necessarily borrow someone to do this, so I want a way of doing it on my own. It's not quite so dignified, but it works. So let me show you how this works and how to get your forks apart. Right, so what you're actually doing, this is connected to the actual fork leg here, because this is bolted onto the top of the damper rod, which is connected right down the bottom. You remember that we loosened off this bolt. So this, as I say, the stanchion leg will just unscrew and will drop down. Now if you drop it down too far, it'll tend to stay on its own a little bit. You'll get oil come out, so you be prepared for some spillage. There's a spring collar here that sits at the top. You can see the spring here, and it has two holes here, one either side, and they're 8mm holes. At the top here you've got the actual damper unit, adjuster unit, and it has these little pegs sticking down, and there's actually a washer here. This washer sits on top of this spring collar. Now what you do is you put your clamp device here and you screw your M8 bolts into the holes like that. Don't over tighten them, just so there. And what you would now normally do is one person would now take this and would push down on this like that, and the other person would hold this and would, when you've got it down far enough, would slide that locking piece in. But I'm on my own, so I'm going to show you how I do it. Right, so what I do instead is I put this clamp into the vise, which is why I didn't put handles on it, and then what you can do is simply push up the bottom. Now I'm just trying it with a jack here underneath the vise to push the fork leg up, which will push this up because this is connected by the damper rod to the bottom of the fork leg. So that will then effectively compress the spring and create me a gap. Now I would normally just do this by hand. One hand pushes up the fork leg, the other hand slides this in, but for the purposes of trying to do it for the camera, I'm going to try it with the jack instead and see how well that works. Right, so as I say, trying to do this for the camera so that you can actually see what's going on, and let's see if this works. The jack will probably fall off, so fingers crossed. Right, so now you can see you've got the washer here, and you can see this has tended to move aside. What we need to do is put this under the washer, like so, so that it's resting directly on top of the actual fork leg here, and this will slide just through the gap there and seat there. And then we let the pressure back off. Which is when my jack fell over, but it's done the job. So now this is held and the spring is compressed, and we can actually work on this quite freely. Right, so now we can remove the compression adjuster from the actual damper rod. Then we can remove the spacer, and now we can release the pressure on the spring. As you can see, I didn't bother using the fork then, or the jack. wound that in just a little bit too far. It's just a tube, so you can see it. So it's just a tube. I had actually wound those in a bit too far and they caught up on the damper rod, so try and keep those clear. And now we can drop the stanchion and remove the spring. At this point you'll need some way to catch the oil. Now notice that with the stock spring that the closer coils, because it's a progressive rate spring in these, the closer coils are at the bottom, and we can measure that when we're done. I'm replacing it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And this is just milky, which tells me that it's badly water contaminated. And just pump it. You'll get oil run out the end of the damper rod. Eight or 10 times, highly recommend. And you can just leave it to drain. Right, now Harley have a special clamp for holding the fork leg, but if you've got some soft jaws in your vise, it's not so hard. So now we need to remove the socket headed bolt that we loosened before. There we go. So it's a banjo bolt. So it's hollow. It's just like a brake bolt, essentially. And with that removed, we can now pull out the damper rod with damper. And that leaves us just with a basic fork leg, which we can take apart in pretty much the standard way. As I say, just put it back in the soft jaws, put it this way around. Bear in mind it still has got fork oil in it, so it will drip, and you should take appropriate precautions. Right, we need to tap off the cover. And that's pretty disgusting in there, as you might expect, especially from a leaky fork like this one. So just lever out the dust cover. So this is really standard fork stuff at this point. And I think we need a bit of a clean in there before we do anything else. Right, with some of the dirt removed from it in there, I can actually now see the locking ring. So just ease that out. And it's, as I say, this is really standard fork stuff here. So if you've ever taken a normal fork apart before, this will be familiar. But as I say, this not looking great. In fact, that's quite corroded. I might see if I can get some new locking rings. I don't know whether they'll be available or not. And then it's the usual case of removing by drifting. Right, it was fair to say that they were in there quite tight. Just let that drip out a bit of oil. So there's a lot of aluminium corrosion, all this white stuff on the oil seal. The spacer, and then we've got a bushing. Bushing looks okay. Have to clean it off and have a look properly. And there's another bushing down here as well. Need to have a clean up and have a look, see what's going on. Alrighty. So once the fork stanchion, this is getting replaced. Now I just need to do the same and strip apart the other fork. Okay, so that's the strip down of the Sportster Sport fork, which is unlike any other Sportster fork. I think it also occurs on one of the Dyners, but that's really it. Now, if you're looking to change the oil, you need to do less than I've just done, but I'm now going to move on to change the O-rings since I got the fork apart, and it seems a good time to do them because they've been on the bike since '98. So I'm going to do that next, but for now that's it. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys again next time.